The sun was shining brightly on a quiet suburban street, where the houses all seemed to have been built at the same time, with neatly trimmed lawns and colorful flowers lining the sidewalks. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, and the occasional car drove past, leaving soft echoes in the warm afternoon air. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved at each other from across the street, where neighbors knew one another by sight if not by name, and where life moved at a gentle pace. On one particular afternoon, the calm of the neighborhood was about to meet a twist of irony that no one could have expected. In the middle of the block, behind a tall fence that gave her backyard a sense of privacy, a woman was enjoying a rare moment of relaxation. She had spent the morning dealing with calls, meetings, and the constant demands of her job. She was the kind of person who carried responsibility like a shield, always alert, always ready. Today, though, she had left that armor behind. She had donned a simple swimsuit, applied sunscreen, and eased herself into the cool water of her own pool. The water rippled gently around her as she floated on her back, eyes closed, letting the sun warm her face. It was her sanctuary, a space where she could forget the pressures of her world and simply exist. She loved the gentle lapping of the water, the smell of chlorine mixed with fresh summer air, and the way the sunlight made the surface sparkle like tiny diamonds. For once, there was no need to make decisions, no need to be in control, no need to think of anyone but herself. For a few hours, she could just be a person, not a leader, not a police chief, just someone enjoying the simple pleasure of an afternoon in the sun. From inside her home, she could see the neighborhood stretched out like a quiet painting. The mail carrier passed by slowly, waving as he walked, and she waved back, smiling at the small, ordinary joy of recognition. Children played a few blocks away, their laughter reaching her ears in soft bursts. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, and safe. But even in moments like these, she carried a subtle awareness. She knew that not everyone would see her as she truly was. She had encountered judgment before, often in ways that were quiet and invisible but no less sharp. Sometimes she felt that the world was always measuring her, weighing her presence and deciding whether it fit their idea of who she should be. Her thoughts drifted as she floated, the warmth of the sun mingling with the cool water. She thought about her career, about the challenges she had faced, about the people she had helped. She thought about the community she served, the kids she had guided, the family she had protected. She was proud of her work, but proud in a quiet, private way, not in a way that sought attention. Today, though, she allowed herself to forget all that. Today was hers. She let the water cradle her, let the sun kiss her skin, and let her mind wander freely. Meanwhile, across the street, in a house that faced the same serene view of the neighborhood, another story was beginning. A neighbor sitting in a cool, air-conditioned living room glanced out the window. She noticed the woman in the pool. At first, she simply looked away, thinking nothing of it. But then her eyes lingered, curiosity turning into suspicion. Something about seeing a woman sunbathing in her own backyard unsettled her. She didn't know this woman personally, had never spoken to her beyond polite greetings, and now her imagination began to fill in gaps with assumptions that were not real. The neighbor's mind began to spin small scenarios. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe this woman wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe there was a danger, a threat, or a rule being broken. Each thought built on the last, a quiet but insistent voice of fear and judgment that seemed to whisper, "You need to do something." It didn't matter that the woman was in her own home, that she had a right to be there. The feeling of suspicion overpowered the knowledge of fact. The neighbor got up and moved closer to the window, trying to get a better look. The woman in the pool stretched her arms above her head, let her fingers trail through the water, completely unaware of the scrutiny from across the street. She laughed softly to herself at a passing butterfly, the sound delicate and light, and continued floating peacefully. Every movement she made was ordinary, simple, natural, and yet, from the neighbor's perspective, the ordinary had been transformed into something questionable. The neighbor's phone was already in her hand before she realized it. Her fingers tapped nervously on the screen as she dialed the authorities, explaining quickly that she had spotted someone in a pool who didn't belong there, or so she thought. Her voice was sharp, tinged with the anxiety of someone who genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. She described the scene in detail, noting the woman's actions, the water, the sunbathing, and the fact that she seemed relaxed and unbothered. The operator on the other end listened patiently, asked a few clarifying questions, and reassured her that help was on the way. Back in the backyard, The woman continued to float, completely at peace. She had no idea that her tranquility was about to be interrupted, that the quiet afternoon she had carefully carved out for herself was about to collide with the judgment of someone who did not know her, someone who had made a decision based on fear and assumptions rather than fact. She let her eyes drift closed, the warmth of the sun on her face masking any awareness of what was about to happen. For a moment, the neighborhood seemed suspended in time. Birds flitted from tree to tree. The wind moved lazily across the lawns and the sun glinted off the rooftops. The woman in the pool remained unaware of the approaching reality, unaware of the tension that had been sparked across the street. She simply existed in her own world, a small island of calm in the larger sea of ordinary life. Even the neighbor, after making the call, felt a brief moment of relief. She thought she had done her duty, that she had protected the community, that she had acted responsibly. There was no malice in her actions, only fear and the desire to maintain control over her environment. She returned to her chair, watching the backyard through the blinds, waiting to see what would happen next. She imagined the authorities arriving, imagined the situation being clarified, imagined a lesson being learned. She did not imagine, however, that she had misjudged the person she had reported in a way that would soon become unforgettable. Inside her own home, the woman finally climbed out of the pool, water dripping from her hair and arms, and wrapped herself in a towel. She smiled at the way the sunlight made droplets of water sparkle like tiny jewels on her skin. It was a moment of simple beauty, a quiet joy that belonged entirely to her. She had no idea that her day of relaxation was about to meet an unexpected twist, that her peace would be briefly interrupted by a misunderstanding rooted in bias and fear. As she sat by the edge of the pool, dipping her feet into the water, she hummed softly to herself, completely unaware of the phone call that had been made, of the neighbor's nervous anticipation, of the approaching authorities who assumed a threat where there was none. She allowed herself to enjoy the warmth of the sun, the sound of the water, and the freedom of this small slice of time. In her mind, she was alone, free, and safe. But life, she knew better than most, has a way of reminding you that peace is never permanent. Even in a place where lawns are neat and streets are quiet, human assumptions and misunderstandings can change the course of a single afternoon in an instant. And so, as she wrapped the towel more tightly around her shoulders and glanced toward the sky, the stage was quietly set for an encounter that neither she nor the neighborhood would forget. The irony of the situation was invisible at this moment. The woman, a respected leader in law enforcement, had spent years maintaining order, solving problems, and protecting people. And now she would soon face a situation where her authority, her experience, and her calm would be tested in a completely unexpected way. The day had begun like any other, with the sun shining and the water sparkling, but it was about to reveal just how quickly the ordinary could collide with judgment and misunderstanding. And yet, in that first part of the afternoon, there was still calm, still beauty, still the gentle rhythm of life moving forward. The woman closed her eyes again, letting the sun warm her face, letting the water cradle her body. She was completely unaware of the small storm that had already been set in motion across the street. A storm built not from malice but from fear, bias, and assumption. In the quiet of her backyard, she floated peacefully, holding on to the simple joy of a moment that, in a few minutes, would become unforgettable. The phone call had been made, and now the neighbor sat back in her chair, hands nervously folded in her lap. Her eyes kept drifting to the window where the backyard pool shimmered under the sun. She could still see the woman there sitting at the edge, dipping her feet into the water, completely unaware of the chain of events that had just been set into motion. Every few minutes, the neighbor's gaze flicked back and forth, imagining what might happen next. She tried to convince herself she had done the right thing. She had called to report a possible trespass to keep the neighborhood safe. She told herself that it was better to be cautious than to ignore a potential problem. Yet beneath the reassurance, there was a flutter of doubt. Her hand shook slightly as she sipped from a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She wondered if maybe she had overreacted, if maybe the woman was just enjoying her afternoon, if maybe the situation was perfectly harmless. But the instinct to protect, the nervous whisper of fear in her mind, held her doubts at bay. She decided to stay by the window until the authorities arrived. After all, she told herself, it was her duty to make sure they knew exactly what they would find. Back in the backyard, the woman, still wrapped in her towel, stretched lazily in the sun. She had no idea that the neighbor's imagination had turned a simple afternoon into a perceived emergency. She dipped her fingers into the water, enjoying the gentle ripples that spread across the surface, and laughed softly at the sound of a bird landing on the fence. There was a lightness to her mood, a freedom she rarely allowed herself during her busy days. It was rare for her to let herself simply enjoy life without thinking about work, responsibilities, or how she appeared to others. This moment was precious, and she was determined to savor it. Across the street, the neighbor's phone buzzed. A patrol car was on its way. Her heart jumped, and she straightened in her chair, glancing back at the pool. The approaching sound of sirens was faint at first, like a distant hum, but it grew steadily louder. She felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. Relief that someone was coming to investigate, to confirm that she had been right. And anticipation because she did not know exactly what the encounter would look like. Her mind raced through possible scenarios, everything from a harmless neighbor to someone breaking into property, but fear ruled over logic. The patrol car pulled into the street, and 2 officers stepped out. They were dressed in standard uniforms, their badges catching the sunlight, their expressions professional but cautious. They approached the backyard with measured steps, aware that their response had been prompted by a concerned neighbor. They were trained to assess risk, to remain calm under pressure, but they could not know in advance that the situation was far from what they might expect. The woman in the pool noticed the officers approaching and rose slowly, water dripping from her hair and arms. She wrapped her towel tighter around her shoulders and stepped onto the deck, her posture calm and composed. She had encountered many situations in her career, many unexpected events, but this one was different. Today she was off duty. Today she was just a person enjoying her home. And yet, as she prepared to greet the approaching officers, she could sense a subtle tension in the air, a caution that felt oddly formal for a simple afternoon. The first officer cleared his throat. "Good afternoon, ma'am. We received a call about someone in the pool here." His eyes flicked briefly toward the neighbor's house before returning to her. "Is everything okay?" The woman smiled, a calm and steady expression. "Yes, everything is perfectly fine. This is my home, my pool, and I was just enjoying the afternoon." Her tone was gentle but firm, carrying the quiet authority of someone who was used to being listened to, even when she did not need to assert herself. The officers exchanged a glance, a brief flash of uncertainty crossing their faces. They had responded to what they believed might be a trespassing situation, or at least a disturbance, and yet the woman standing before them exuded a confidence and calm that made it clear she was not a threat. They nodded politely, but their training urged them to verify her identification, to ensure that she was who she said she was. "Could we see some identification just to confirm?" one of the officers asked. His voice was respectful but carried the professional tone that comes with years of experience in law enforcement. The woman reached into her bag and produced a badge, holding it up for the officers to see. Their eyes widened slightly as they read the title, Police Chief. For a moment there was silence, a pause where the weight of reality settled over the scene. The officers had expected someone ordinary, someone they might need to question or remove from the property. Instead, they found a leader, a woman whose position carried authority, experience, and respect in law enforcement. The realization hit the neighbor next. She had been watching from her window, and now she could see the badge clearly. Her heart sank. She had misjudged the situation entirely. The fear and suspicion that had seemed so justified in her mind moments ago were now replaced with embarrassment and guilt. She had assumed, without knowing anything about the woman in the pool, that she was out of place, that she did not belong. And now that assumption had been proven completely wrong. The woman in the pool noticed the neighbor's expression, saw the mix of nervousness and realization, and chose to address it with calm professionalism. "It's important to know the full story before calling authorities," she said gently. "We all have a responsibility to understand the situation before jumping to conclusions. It can prevent unnecessary stress for everyone involved." The neighbor's cheeks flushed with a deep shade of red. She nodded quickly, murmuring an apology. I didn't know. I thought. I just wanted to make sure everything was safe." Her voice was small, uncertain. She had not intended to cause trouble, only to protect what she believed was her neighborhood. Now she saw the consequences of acting on assumptions without full knowledge. The officers relaxed slightly, returning to their professional composure. "Thank you for clarifying, ma'am," one said, giving a polite nod. "We'll make a note of it and be on our way." They stepped back, offering a courteous wave, and began to head toward their car. Their presence, once a source of tension, now felt almost ceremonial. A brief acknowledgement of the misunderstanding before normal life resumed. The woman returned her focus to the pool, stepping back onto the deck and letting the towel fall from her shoulders. She took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the sun soak into her skin. The water glistened invitingly, and she could feel the tension of the past few minutes slowly melting away. It was a strange interruption, a moment that had brought unnecessary stress. Yet it also reminded her of the patience and composure required in all aspects of her life. Across the street, the neighbor sat back down in her chair, still feeling the weight of embarrassment and guilt. She glanced toward the pool one more time, watching the woman float peacefully in the water as if nothing had happened. The calmness of the scene was almost a rebuke, a reminder that assumptions can create storms where none exist. She realized that her fear, though genuine, had been misplaced, and that understanding and observation were far more valuable than snap judgments. The neighborhood itself seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Birds continued to sing, the wind continued to rustle leaves, and the sun continued to shine, oblivious to human drama. Children played further down the street, their laughter a reminder of life's simple joys. The scene in the backyard, once filled with tension and misjudgment, returned to a state of ordinary peace. The woman in the pool took a long, slow swim, letting the water cradle her body. She reflected on the brief disturbance, on the assumptions that had led to the unnecessary call, and on the patience it took to navigate situations like this gracefully. She knew that misunderstandings were part of life, part of human nature, but she also knew that they could be opportunities for reflection, for teaching, and for growth. As she floated on her back again, eyes closed, she allowed herself a quiet smile. The incident, though irritating, had passed. It had been a reminder that even in moments of calm, the world could bring unexpected challenges. It had been a lesson in humility, for others, yes, but also for herself in the way she handled it. And most importantly, it had shown that patience, clarity, and calm composure could turn a tense situation back into peace. The officers drove away, the neighbor returned to her routine, and the woman reclaimed her afternoon. She dipped her hands into the water, feeling the cool ripple against her skin, and laughed softly to herself. Life continued, uninterrupted, filled with small, beautiful moments that belonged to her. The pool, the sun, the gentle rhythm of a quiet street, these were her treasures, and she was determined to enjoy them fully. Even as the day moved forward, she remained aware that the world around her could be unpredictable. People might judge, assumptions might be made, and misunderstandings could happen in the blink of an eye. Yet she also knew that calm, confidence, and dignity could navigate any storm, no matter how small or absurd it might seem. And so the afternoon continued, with the sun shining, the water sparkling, and the woman floating peacefully in her own backyard. A gentle reminder that even when the world makes mistakes, grace and patience can restore balance. The afternoon sun continued to cast a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood, painting shadows along the sidewalks and highlighting the gentle sway of trees in the breeze. The woman back in her pool felt the water slip past her skin as she floated on her back once more. After the brief interruption, she allowed herself to relax fully, listening to the sounds of the world around her, the rustling leaves, the distant laughter of children, and the occasional hum of cars passing by. Life had returned to its ordinary rhythm, and she felt herself sinking deeper into the comfort of her private sanctuary. Yet the events of the day had not gone entirely unnoticed. The neighbor across the street, still perched by the window, was struggling to process what had just happened. Her initial fear had turned into embarrassment, then guilt, and now into curiosity. She could not stop thinking about the woman in the pool, the calm authority with which she had handled the situation, and the badge that revealed her true role in the community. Every time she glanced back, she felt a strange mix of awe and shame. How could she have been so quick to assume the worst? As she pondered these questions, her phone buzzed with notifications. Word of the incident had already started to circulate quietly in the neighborhood group chat. Messages were polite but filled with curiosity. Some neighbors expressed surprise, some humor, and some genuine reflection. "Did you hear about the woman in the pool? She's the police chief," one message read. Another replied, "I can't believe someone called the authorities on her. Unbelievable." The neighbor felt the weight of these comments. realizing that her assumptions were not only personal, but had now become a small social lesson for the community. Meanwhile, the woman in the pool had dried off and was sitting at the edge, her feet dangling in the water, thinking about how quickly ordinary moments could spiral into unexpected situations. She had spent years in law enforcement, trained to deal with tension, conflict, and misunderstandings. Yet it was always surprising how personal bias could trigger events that seemed completely unnecessary. She considered how people often acted based on fear, assumptions, or a sense of duty, without taking the time to verify the facts. It was a reminder that patience and understanding were as important in private life as they were on duty. Across the street, the neighbor finally gathered the courage to step outside and walk down the driveway. She approached the edge of her lawn, keeping a respectful distance, unsure of how to start a conversation. The woman in the pool noticed her and gave a small, welcoming nod, signaling that she was open to dialogue. The neighbor's steps were hesitant at first, each one measured as though she were walking on fragile ground. When she finally reached the sidewalk closest to the pool, she paused, her voice trembling slightly. I just wanted to apologize," the neighbor said. "I didn't know it was your pool. I overreacted. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." She looked down at her feet, ashamed of her assumptions and the unnecessary tension she had caused. The woman smiled gently, a calm warmth in her expression. "Thank you for saying that. I understand. It's natural to be cautious, but it's also important to make sure we understand the situation before acting. We all make mistakes." Her tone was kind, yet it carried the quiet authority of someone used to teaching lessons without raising her voice. The neighbor nodded, a small sense of relief washing over her, though the embarrassment lingered. At that moment, a few other neighbors stepped outside, having witnessed the earlier scene from their own windows. Some had been curious, some had been concerned, and some had simply wanted to see what all the fuss was about. They approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance, but their presence added a subtle layer of awareness. Conversations began quietly, neighbors exchanging words like, "Did you see that?" and "I can't believe she's the police chief." The incident had become a shared experience, a moment that would ripple through the community long after the sun had set. The woman, still seated by the pool, addressed the small group with quiet composure. "I know it may have seemed unusual from your perspective, but this is my home and my backyard. I hope this can be a reminder that assumptions can be misleading. Taking the time to understand before acting can prevent unnecessary stress for everyone." Her words were measured, but they carried weight. The neighbors listened, some nodding in agreement, some reflecting silently, realizing the truth in her message. The neighbor who had made the call shifted uncomfortably, grateful for the chance to learn from the experience. She felt a mix of humility and admiration. Here was someone who had faced the situation with grace, who could have been angry or confrontational, yet chose to teach rather than scold. The lesson was clear. Understanding and patience could diffuse tension far more effectively than immediate action driven by fear or bias. As the day continued, the woman returned to the pool, dipping her hands into the water and letting the gentle ripples spread across the surface. She floated quietly for a while, reflecting on the human tendency to judge quickly and act impulsively. She thought about how easily ordinary moments could be disrupted by fear, assumptions, or misinformation. But she also thought about the resilience of people, about the ability to learn and grow when confronted with truth. The neighborhood had been given a small, unexpected opportunity for reflection, and she hoped it would not be wasted. Meanwhile, conversations among the neighbors continued, more voices joining in. People discussed what had happened, each adding their own perspective. Some admitted that they might have acted in a similar way, feeling the same nervous instinct to protect their community. Others expressed admiration for the woman's calm response and professionalism. Slowly, the collective understanding of the incident began to shift, from judgment and suspicion to reflection and learning. The neighbor who had called the authorities finally spoke again, addressing the small group. "I see now that I acted too quickly. I thought I was helping, but I didn't have all the facts. I hope we can all remember to check before we judge." Her words were sincere, and a few of the other neighbors nodded in agreement. The woman in the pool smiled, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The tension that had hung over the street like an invisible cloud was lifting, replaced by a shared sense of understanding and respect. As evening approached, the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. The warmth of the day remained, but there was a softness to the light, a reminder that time moves forward and moments of tension eventually pass. The woman in the pool swam slowly, letting herself enjoy the calm of the water, the beauty of the sunset, and the knowledge that she had navigated an awkward situation with patience and grace. The neighbor who had made the call returned to her home, carrying with her a lesson in humility and the understanding that appearances can be deceiving. She thought about how easy it was to act on fear without verifying facts, and how important it was to approach situations with care, compassion, and an open mind. The incident would stay with her, a reminder to be more thoughtful in the future, to listen before acting, and to consider the full picture before making judgments. In the backyard, the woman reflected on the day's events quietly. She thought about her role in the community, the responsibility she carried, and the human tendency to misjudge. She knew that misunderstandings were inevitable, but she also believed that each situation carried an opportunity to teach, to guide, and to create awareness. Her own response had been calm, patient, and measured, and she felt proud that she could turn an awkward moment into a lesson for others. The neighborhood itself began to settle into evening. Lights flickered on in the windows, the sounds of children playing faded, and a sense of normalcy returned. Yet the memory of the day would linger. It was a story that neighbors would share, a story that would remind them of the importance of understanding, the dangers of assumptions, and the value of patience and respect. The woman in the pool finally climbed out, wrapped herself in a towel, and looked around at her backyard. Everything was as it had been before. The pool glimmered, the flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the neighborhood was calm. Yet the day had left its mark in subtle ways. It had reminded everyone that ordinary moments could be disrupted by fear and assumptions, but also that such moments could be transformed into opportunities for learning and growth. She took a deep breath, savoring the calm and the warmth of the remaining sunlight. She thought about the people she served, the community she led, and the way a single afternoon could hold both tension and insight. Her mind drifted to the simple joys she had been enjoying before the interruption. The feel of the water, the sound of the wind, the beauty of the sun reflecting off the pool. Those joys were still hers, unspoiled by misunderstanding, strengthened by her ability to respond with composure and clarity. And so, as the sun dipped lower and the shadows grew longer, the woman in the pool felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The incident, though unnecessary and fueled by assumptions, had been handled gracefully. The neighborhood had learned something, even if only subtly, about patience, respect, and the dangers of acting without full understanding. The woman returned to her home, closing the door gently behind her, carrying with her the peace that comes from knowing she had maintained dignity and calm in the face of misunderstanding. The day was ending, but the story was not yet complete. The events that had unfolded would ripple through the neighborhood for weeks to come, serving as a quiet lesson in judgment, empathy, and awareness. And in the woman's own heart, there was a reaffirmation of her belief that patience and understanding could navigate any situation, no matter how unexpected or challenging. The evening air had a soft, cooling touch that brushed across the neighborhood, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. The sun had dipped lower, casting long, warm shadows across the sidewalks and lawns, and the quiet hum of suburban life continued uninterrupted. Inside her backyard, the woman had returned to her pool one last time for the day, letting the water ripple gently around her as she reflected on the earlier events. The neighbor who had made the call still lingered nearby, standing hesitantly on her own porch. She had not wanted to intrude, but felt compelled to make amends in some way. The embarrassment of the day weighed on her, and she was eager to find a path toward reconciliation. She had never intended to cause discomfort or tension, yet she realized now that her assumptions had done exactly that. The woman in the pool noticed her, saw the nervous way she held herself, and decided to address it calmly. "You don't need to feel bad," the woman said gently, her voice carrying across the small distance between their yards. "I understand why you reacted the way you did. Fear and caution are natural, especially when we care about our community. But it's important to remember that assumptions can sometimes cause more harm than good." The neighbor looked up, her eyes glistening slightly with the mix of relief and lingering shame. "I really didn't know," she admitted softly. I just saw someone in the pool and I don't know, I panicked. I thought I was doing the right thing. I just wanted to protect everyone. The woman nodded, letting the words settle in. I understand, she said. But the right thing isn't always the first thing we think of. Sometimes it's better to pause, observe, and make sure we understand the situation before acting. That way, we avoid unnecessary tension and confusion. Her tone was gentle, not scolding, but firm enough to leave a lasting impression. The neighbor took a slow breath, absorbing the advice. I see that now, she said. I guess I have some thinking to do about how quickly I judge things. I didn't realize how much assumptions can hurt, even if no one intends harm. The woman smiled faintly, a warmth in her expression. We all make mistakes. The important part is learning from them. You've already done the hardest thing, acknowledging it and speaking up. Nearby, other neighbors who had been watching from their windows or walking down the street began to join the conversation, drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness the resolution. The gathering was small and respectful, but it carried the weight of community attention. The woman in the pool, now fully dried off and seated on a chair by the deck, addressed them as a group. Today could have been just another afternoon, she said, her voice calm and measured, but it became a moment that shows how important it is to pause before making assumptions. We see what we think we see, but reality can be very different. Every one of us has the responsibility to approach situations thoughtfully, with understanding and patience. Her words carried quietly but firmly across the small group. Some nodded. Some lowered their heads, realizing that they too might have been quick to judge in the past. Others whispered to one another, discussing how easy it was to misinterpret situations when filtered through fear or preconceived notions. The scene became a subtle teaching moment, a reminder that awareness and empathy are as important as vigilance. The neighbor who had made the initial call stepped closer, voice still low but sincere. I just want to say again, I'm sorry. I overreacted. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I see now that my actions were unnecessary. I hope you can forgive me. The woman in the pool nodded, appreciating the sincerity. I accept your apology, she said. The best way to move forward is to remember what we've learned today and let it guide our actions in the future. That way, we all benefit, and misunderstandings like this can be avoided. There was a brief pause, a quiet moment where the group reflected on the lessons of the day. The sun had lowered further, casting a soft orange glow across the water, making it sparkle like tiny gems. The calmness of the evening contrasted sharply with the tension that had existed only hours before. It was a reminder that even in the most ordinary settings, misunderstandings could happen, and yet they could also be resolved with patience, honesty, and humility. One of the neighbors, a man who had been watching from across the street, spoke up. I think we all saw a little bit of ourselves in this, he said. We acted out of instinct, but maybe we didn't think enough. It's easy to make judgments quickly without knowing the whole story. Today reminded me to slow down and think before I act. Others murmured their agreement. The woman in the pool looked at each face, recognizing the small shift in awareness. This was exactly the outcome she had hoped for, a gentle understanding, a ripple of reflection that could influence how people thought and acted in the future. As the evening continued, the woman rose and walked slowly around the edge of her pool, letting the water slip through her fingers. She reflected on how often life presents these moments where patience and perspective are tested. She thought about her own role as a leader in the community, about how she had to navigate challenges with calmness and clarity, and about the subtle ways she could guide others without imposing authority unnecessarily. The neighbor who had caused the incident watched closely, learning from both the words and the demeanor of the woman. She realized that leadership was not just about a title or a badge. It was about how someone handled themselves in unexpected situations, how they educated others without anger, and how they maintained dignity even when wrong assumptions were made. In the backyard, the woman paused and gestured toward the pool. Life is full of small moments that test us, she said softly, and not every challenge comes with clear rules or instructions. What matters is how we respond, whether we act with understanding, patience, and respect for others, or whether we react impulsively based on fear or assumptions. The choice is ours every time. The neighbor nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the lesson. She realized that she had been so focused on fear and vigilance that she had overlooked the simplest truth. People deserve respect until proven otherwise. Her mind replayed the afternoon, imagining how she could have approached the situation differently, and she resolved to be more mindful in the future. Other neighbors began to disperse, quietly returning to their homes, but the lesson lingered in the air. The neighborhood had witnessed something unexpected, something that challenged assumptions and something that highlighted the value of calm, reasoned responses. The woman in the pool remained seated by the water, watching as the final rays of sunlight dipped below the rooftops, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. She knew that the day's events would become a story shared among neighbors, a small moment that carried a meaningful lesson. People would talk about the woman in the pool, the neighbor who had called authorities, and the unexpected twist of reality. But beyond the curiosity and chatter, the true message would be about patience, awareness, and empathy, about the importance of seeing the full picture before acting. The evening grew cooler, and the woman decided it was time to end her day by the pool. She stepped out of the water, towel in hand, and stretched in the soft, fading light. There was a calm pride in the way she moved, a quiet contentment in knowing that she had navigated an awkward situation with grace. Her eyes scanned the neighborhood, one last time before she returned to her home, appreciating the stillness and the lessons that had emerged from an otherwise ordinary afternoon. The neighbor across the street stayed for a moment longer, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about her instincts, her assumptions, and the importance of pausing before reacting. She understood that mistakes could happen, but it was how one responded afterward that truly mattered. This small interaction had become a personal turning point, a chance to grow and reconsider how she approached people and situations in the future. The neighborhood, bathed in the soft glow of the evening, settled into quiet. Lights flickered. On inside houses, the distant hum of traffic faded and the rhythm of suburban life resumed. Yet the story of the pool, the call and the calm woman who handled it with dignity, would remain in the memory of those who witnessed it. It was a reminder that misunderstandings can happen anywhere, that assumptions can lead to tension, and that patience and reflection can restore balance. Inside her home, the woman reflected on the day with a sense of fulfillment. She thought about her own ability to stay calm, the way she had addressed the situation, and the small but meaningful impact she had on her neighbor's awareness. She understood that authority is not just about a title. It is about the ability to guide, teach, and lead, even in unexpected and personal moments. The night closed in, quiet and gentle, leaving the neighborhood peaceful once more. The events of the day had passed, but the lessons remained. About human assumptions, about patience, about understanding, and about the way small actions can ripple through a community. And for the woman, the quiet pride of knowing she had maintained dignity, offered guidance, and remained calm in the face of unnecessary tension, carried her into the night, ready to face whatever the next day might bring. The sun had long disappeared behind the rooftops, leaving a soft twilight that settled over the neighborhood. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of evening blossoms and the comforting quiet of suburban life winding down. Inside her backyard, the woman sat on the pool deck, wrapped in a towel, reflecting on the events of the day. It had been an ordinary afternoon that had turned into something unexpected, something that had taught lessons not just to the neighbor who called authorities, but to everyone who had witnessed, even from a distance, what had happened. The neighbor who had made the call stood hesitantly near the edge of her own yard, still carrying a quiet weight of guilt. She had spent the evening replaying the moments in her mind, her fear, her assumptions, the snap judgment that led her to call the authorities. And yet, she had also spent the evening reflecting on the woman's calm response, the way she had handled the situation with dignity and patience. It had been a lesson in humility, but also in grace. Finally, the neighbor took a deep breath and decided to step closer, crossing her yard with careful, measured steps. The woman in the pool looked up as she approached and offered a welcoming smile, one that spoke of forgiveness and understanding without needing to say a word. The neighbor stopped at a respectful distance, hesitant at first, then spoke in a low, sincere voice. I just wanted to say again, I'm sorry. I really didn't know and I overreacted. I thought I was helping, but I see now that I caused more stress than anything else. I hope you can forgive me. The woman nodded, her expression calm and kind. I accept your apology, she said gently. Acknowledging it and learning from it is the most important thing. We all make mistakes, but the way we respond afterward matters more than anything. The neighbor exhaled slowly, feeling a release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, she said softly. I've learned a lot today. I'll try to be more mindful in the future, to pause before reacting and to understand the situation fully. A few other neighbors had noticed the exchange and had stepped outside to watch. They lingered quietly, sensing the importance of the moment. There was no judgment, no gossip, just the shared awareness that something significant had occurred in their otherwise ordinary neighborhood. People whispered among themselves, acknowledging the lesson that had unfolded before them. Fear and assumptions could lead to misunderstandings, but calmness, patience, and understanding could turn those moments into learning experiences. The woman looked around at the neighbors and spoke again, her voice steady and reassuring. Today could have gone differently if I had responded with anger or if the situation had escalated. But by staying calm and explaining, I hope we can all remember to give people the benefit of the doubt. We don't always know the whole story, and taking the time to understand can make all the difference. A gentle murmur of agreement passed through the small group. Some nodded, others simply stood quietly, reflecting on how often they too might have acted on assumptions without full knowledge. The words carried a quiet authority that did not demand obedience but inspired reflection. For a moment, the neighborhood seemed to pause, each person absorbing the truth of what had happened. The neighbor who had called authorities smiled weakly, feeling a sense of closure. I understand now, she said. I've been thinking about how quick we are to judge. I see how easily fear can take over. Today reminded me to pause, to observe, and to understand before I act. I hope others in the neighborhood can take that lesson too. The woman nodded again, pleased by the sincerity. That's all anyone can ask for, she said. Learning and growing from these experiences is what keeps our community strong. We all benefit when we approach each other with understanding and respect. The evening air grew cooler as the sun finally disappeared, leaving behind a deep, soft blue sky sprinkled with early stars. The neighborhood lights began to flicker on, casting a warm glow across lawns and windows. The small group of neighbors dispersed slowly, returning to their homes with a sense of reflection that was quieter and more meaningful than casual evening chatter. The woman returned to her pool, dipping her hands into the water, feeling its cool embrace one last time before the day ended. She let herself float quietly, closing her eyes and listening to the sounds around her. The rustling of leaves, the distant hum of cars, the soft murmurs of the night settling in. The water reflected the fading light, shimmering like tiny diamonds, a calm mirror to the peaceful resolution of the day. She thought about the power of patience and understanding, and how small actions could ripple through a community. One afternoon, one misunderstanding, one calm response had created an opportunity for reflection and growth. She felt a quiet pride not in authority or position, but in the ability to transform tension into awareness, embarrassment into learning, and fear into understanding. Inside her home, she prepared for the evening, thinking about the day's lessons. The incident, though brief, had reminded her of the challenges people face in navigating assumptions, and the importance of patience and clarity in every situation. She considered how easy it was for fear to cloud judgment, and how essential it was to approach life with empathy and awareness. It was a lesson she hoped the neighborhood would carry forward. The neighbor across the street, too, carried the day's experiences into her home. She reflected on the incident in quiet thought, realizing how quickly fear and assumptions could escalate into unnecessary actions. But she also recognized the power of apology, of reflection, and of learning from experience. She resolved to be more mindful in the future, to pause before reacting and to seek understanding before judgment. The day had been a small but profound turning point for her, and she carried the lesson with gratitude. The woman returned to her living room, sitting by a window and gazing out at her backyard. The pool was quiet now, reflecting the moonlight, a mirror of the calm that had returned. She felt a sense of peace, knowing she had handled the situation with dignity and patience. She thought about the ripple effect her calmness had created, How one act of measured response could influence an entire neighborhood, and how understanding and grace could teach lessons more effectively than anger or confrontation ever could. The evening grew deeper, and the neighborhood settled fully into night. The hum of traffic faded, the distant sounds of late activity quieted, and the stars shone softly in the sky above. The woman felt the satisfaction of a day resolved with calm and understanding. She knew that stories like this, small moments in ordinary places, often carried the most important lessons. A single afternoon in a backyard pool had revealed insights about judgment, bias, patience, and the power of measured response. Even as she prepared for bed, the lessons lingered in her mind. She thought about the ways communities can learn from each other, the importance of reflection before action, and the strength found in calm, clear communication. She understood that misunderstandings are inevitable, but that they do not have to leave harm in their wake. The ability to respond with dignity, to teach without anger, and to forgive sincerely could transform even an awkward incident into a moment of growth. The neighbor who had called authorities also settled in for the night, reflecting on her actions and the woman's response. She realized that fear and assumption had driven her, but humility and understanding could correct mistakes. She thought about the small ways she could change her behavior moving forward, how she could approach situations more thoughtfully, and how one afternoon could leave a lasting impression on both herself and the community. In the quiet of the night, the neighborhood rested, carrying the echoes of the day's events. A story had unfolded that would be shared in whispers and conversations for days to come. It was a story not of conflict but of reflection, not of anger but of calm, not of division but of understanding. The woman's composure, the neighbor's apology, and the subtle lessons for all who observed had created a moment that resonated far beyond the backyard. The woman finally climbed into bed, feeling a gentle satisfaction that comes from knowing she had handled the day with grace. She thought about the unexpected events, the way people react out of fear, and the importance of patience, empathy, and clarity. She understood that life is full of small moments like this, moments where judgment could cloud perception, but where calmness and understanding could restore balance. As she drifted off to sleep, she carried with her a quiet hope. A hope that the lesson of the day would linger in the neighborhood, that people would remember to pause before judging, and that understanding and patience would guide their actions in the future. She knew the story would be shared, remembered, and reflected upon, but more importantly, she knew the message it carried. Fear and assumptions can create unnecessary tension, but grace, dignity, and calmness can transform misunderstanding into learning. The night passed quietly. Stars twinkled above, casting a soft light over the neighborhood, and the world continued in its steady rhythm. The woman slept peacefully, her mind at ease, knowing she had maintained calm in the face of misunderstanding and had turned a moment of tension into an opportunity for reflection. The neighbor who had acted impulsively also slept, contemplating how one afternoon could teach lessons that would last far longer than the moment itself. By morning, the neighborhood would wake with the memory of the day lingering in subtle ways. Conversations would echo with reflection, lessons would ripple through interactions, and the story of a simple afternoon in a backyard pool would serve as a gentle reminder to all. Patience, understanding, and calm composure can turn fear and assumption into insight and growth. And in the heart of it all, the woman, strong, composed, and serene, had shown that true leadership and humanity are revealed not